probably the thing I'm most fascinated about is exactly that. Like, I have kids at the age where in 10 years they'll be into the workforce, and I'm thinking about what their lives are going to be like when they're into the workforce. And the idea that they're going to be using AI in all kinds of meaningful and different ways. My daughter wants to be a trauma surgeon. Like, how will AI be relevant or prevalent in her life as a trauma surgeon?
Hi, I'm Boaz, founder and CEO of Augmented AI, and I'm thrilled that you're tuning in to the Shift AI podcast, the show where we explore what it takes to thrive and adapt in the ever-changing digital age of remote work and AI. In today's episode, I'm excited to welcome Doug Seven as our guest. Doug has had a long and distinguished career in the tech industry with significant roles at both Microsoft and Amazon. He's currently the director and general manager of AWS AI Developer Experiences, where he's focused on how developers can leverage the next generation of Gen AI tools to drive innovation. If you're someone interested in the intersection of developer productivity and AI, this is an episode you won't want to miss. We'd also like to give a special shout out to Augmented AI for sponsoring today's show. We're super excited to dive into today's conversation with Doug, so let's get to it. All right, Doug, welcome to the Shift AI podcast. I'm really excited to have you on today. It's going to be a fun show.
I'm looking forward to this. Yeah, I think it's going to be a lot of fun.
All right, so for the audience, I'm going to talk about your experience, and then when I'm done, you can correct me.
All right.
A very, very long career at both Microsoft and at Amazon. What's interesting about the Microsoft experience is that you were very much in the developer experiences space, right? You were the developer experience in the developer experience group, director of Partner Catalyst, principal group manager. You were general manager for Azure Health and Data Services. And now you're the director and GM of AWS AI Developer Experiences. So you spent a long career thinking about the ways that developers are using tools. And I'm sure it's super exciting for you now that we're moving into this AI era. Did I get that right? Or there's some things that I missed about the way that you engaged, at Microsoft and Amazon in regards to the development community?
No, you absolutely got that right. I think in summary of it, I started my career as a developer and then got to move in and kind of cut my teeth in large tech companies focused on developer productivity tools and working on tools like Visual Studio and the .NET Framework and things that are consumed by millions of developers worldwide. And then moving into building large-scale cloud services and now kind of bringing those things together to build developer productivity tools that depend on large-scale cloud services powered by generative AI, which is really exciting.
Yeah, and you've been doing this for a long time. Where'd you grow up? What part of the world did you learn how to code?
Sadly, I'm not very ventured out. I grew up in the Seattle area and then went to work for some Seattle-based companies. I did actually try to get out of the Seattle area, but these companies keep calling me back. So I grew up, I actually learned kind of my beginnings of software development as a probably, maybe 10 or 11 years old. I have older brother, who's very academic and very scientific. My father was a software developer, so we had computers around us, and I got the chance to experiment with, go-to loops and things like that, using Microsoft Basic, working on it. For those who remember them, the TRS-80, which was from Tandy.
Oh, yeah.
You stored everything on cassette tape, which was really incredible. But my early days were building like choose your own adventure games with simple go-to instructions, which is a lot of fun.
That's cool. So development was in the family. It goes way back.
Yeah. Yeah. And then as I got older, I actually, in the mid 90s, I went to my brother's wedding. And as I mentioned, he's scientific and academic. And so he shared with me this thing that scientists were using to share information via a network called the World Wide Web, which was really...
I've heard of that.
Really exciting. It was all in black and white, interestingly enough. But that really piqued my interest. I was like, wow, this is a really cool way of building and showing and sharing information. This is like early to mid 90s, and started to get myself into learning how this technology worked and what is HTTP and what is HTML and how do you do these things, and started building online websites and properties and things like that.
Well, this show is as much about AI as it is about the future of work. And I always like to ask this question. It just kind of humanizes the folks that are on the show. But what was the first job where you actually got paid, where someone gave you money in exchange for your service? Was it something related to fixing computers or doing something with code?
Oh, the first thing I got paid for doing software. That's a good question.
Or not software, anything. What was the first time you got a paycheck?
I was a paper boy. I delivered the newspaper. So I'd get up in the morning and go get my stack of newspapers and go and deliver them. And that was my first money-making endeavor.
Yeah, nice. Well, a lot has changed since we were reading papers,
Yes.
via the World Wide Web, and then now on to this new generation of tools in the AI space. I want to dive in and talk about that. Before we do go deep into it, will you just explain kind of your org at AWS and where you fit in to the company?
Yeah. So within Amazon Web Services, we have an organization we call the Next Generation Developer Experience Organization. And we're really responsible, if you think about like our charter, is to think about what do we want the developer experience to be for people building for AWS in the future? How do we want to enable those developers to be successful? And how do we want to make the process as easy and success-oriented as possible? And so a heavy part of our focus is how do we apply AI and generative AI into that process to help not only help developers individually be more successful, more productive, but help organizations realize business value through software faster.
Yeah, absolutely. To that end, I've been talking to a lot of our developers inside our company and others, and the efficiencies that software developers are seeing are dramatic. And I know that other businesses are seeing productivity spikes too in the marketing side and other parts of the org, but it seems like developers are really seeing some dramatic efficiencies. And I guess I wonder if you could talk a little bit about that, but also about some of the differences between what you guys are doing and Copilot and, GitHub Copilot and just some of your competitors. How are you guys thinking about the differences between the ways that you guys are supporting developers, and what kind of efficiencies are you seeing out there?
Yeah, this is a really exciting space because of just that, like the ability to apply artificial intelligence and create efficiencies and productivity and eliminate the things that we don't like to do so that we can put our time and energy into the things we do like to do is really remarkable. I think why this sort of has come to software development first is we're the ones building it, so it's easy to build it for ourselves. But it's also a domain that lends itself very easily to using generative AI in the sense that it's very, writing software is very text heavy. There's a lot of repetition that happens in software development. There's a lot of data to pull from and train on and learn from and do things with. And the fact that there's so much open source code out there made it really easy to start to build these language models that understood software development and can apply themselves to software development. Now, what we've seen over the last few years as we've been working on this technology is exactly what you're describing, which is this kind of increasing amount of productivity gains that people are getting, both as the technology gets better and, interestingly, as people kind of learn how to adapt it into their workflow and how to, when is the right time to leverage AI and when do I want to use it? How do I want to use it? And so we're seeing really remarkable things. We mentioned recently Andy Jassy mentioned in our earnings call that we've been using some of the Amazon Q developer capabilities internally. One of those is what we call the agent for code transformation. This is the ability to ask Amazon Q to kind of independently go off and do some work for you, sort of somewhat asynchronously, and then come back when it's done and say, okay, I've done the work, here's the changes, go ahead and review it. Kind of like we would if we were doing, another developer doing a peer review. And in this case, the agent for code transformation focuses on upgrading Java applications from Java 8 or Java 11 to Java 17. And what we shared in the earnings call is that we've been using this technology internally. We have a long history of doing Java development. We have a lot of Java applications. And we've applied this to about 30,000 production Java applications. And the result of upgrading those Java applications, one is the amount of time we saved. So by having AI do that work, we estimate, I would say conservatively, about 4,500 developer years saved by having AI do this work for us. And then because of what we've been able to do and upgrading to more modern versions of the JDK and using Java, we sort of estimate that's about $260 million in annual savings for the operations of those applications. So really remarkable in terms of what that means for us as an organization. And then, for the engineers who are doing that work, this is a great example of the kind of work that is often not everybody's favorite. Being assigned to go do a Java upgrade is not the thing that people get most excited about. And so to be able to leverage AI to do that and to do it quickly and efficiently is really remarkable.
Yeah, that's amazing. Well, I was excited to talk to you today because I did really want to talk about agents and about multitasking. And it's very different. A lot of the audience is using ChatGPT every day. They're using AI to do things that are using prompt engineering. they're not doing a lot of agent-driven work yet. And I want to talk about that. I want to, one, explain Q for those that don't, for audience members that don't know about it, and then also agents in particular. And then we can kind of dive into some follow-up questions about agents.
Sure. Well, let me start by kind of explaining Q and Q Developer. So Amazon Q is the generative AI assistant capabilities that we've created. And you can sort of divide it into two parts. We've created what we call Q Business, which really tailors itself to connecting to your repositories of business data. Maybe it's your Salesforce system. Maybe you keep documents in Box or in S3, and connecting to those systems and being able to have an interface to gather information and consolidate information and identify and work through that information using AI, and then extending that with this concept of Q apps, where I could sort of through natural language describe to Q a line of business application I want, maybe an HR onboarding app or marketing quality review app or quarterly review app or something like that. So great tools there. And then on the other side of that is Q Developer, which really focuses on the software developer and software development teams and how do we make the process of building software better. While we do kind of really look to how do we help people who are building and targeting AWS for their applications, Q Developer works for any application in any environment. So it can just as easily work for people who are building on premises and running local compute or on another public cloud. But we really do make the experience for AWS exceptional. And so Q Developer has a handful of capabilities within it, some that you sort of might expect, which is like the code generation capabilities, that as I'm writing my code, I'm going to get a suggestion. Maybe I write a method signature and I get a suggestion for how to write that whole method. Or I write a comment and I get a suggestion for the code that would implement what's in that comment. I also have a chat interface, so I can ask more long-form questions or have more sort of iterative work, or ask what actually one of the more popular uses is to explain code to me. So I open up some code, I work on a project that maybe I'm not familiar with, and rather than reading through lots of code, I could just say, hey, Q, just summarize this for me, tell me what it does, and it can do that. But then it has these agents, and the agents are really remarkable, and this is where I think we differentiate from other tools out there, in that we've created so far two agents. One is the agent for software development, which is an agent that you can assign feature development work to, and it will go off and write code for you and come back and give you the change set. And then the one I mentioned already, the agent for code transformation, which is for specifically around Java application upgrades.
Before we go further with the interview, I want to take a moment to tell you about one of our podcast sponsors, Augmented AI, and how they are transforming businesses with Gen AI solutions. Augmented AI specializes in helping organizations uncover and address internal workflow challenges that Gen AI can solve. Their comprehensive process starts by identifying and prioritizing business problems, and then assessing each based on value, effort, and risk. Once a problem is selected, the Augmented AI team tests and validates the solution to ensure that it works. Only after this thorough validation do they draft technical requirements, which serve as a blueprint for building and deploying the solutions. The real beauty of partnering with Augmented AI is that they don't just stop at strategy and feasibility studies. They actually stand up the solutions and manage them for you so you can focus on what you do best. If you're interested in experiencing this innovative approach to deploying Gen AI solutions, visit simplyaugmented.ai and click on the Learn More button. That's simplyaugmented.ai. Now back to the episode. So let's talk about agents and the phenomenon of agents and the way that humans interact with them, humans in the loop. So there's most likely going to be a world, not just for developers, but for everybody, where tasks get delivered to an agent. That agent goes off and does them with multiple steps, and then they come back and deliver the results to you that you check before it goes out the door, but you have multiple steps that are happening. What are the things that are stopping us from going there quickly? And why has it taken so long to have kind of multi-step tasks be done by agents? And then I want to talk about some of the ethical things. But first, let's talk about some of the technical things, because I mean, Sam Altman's been talking about this for a long time. Microsoft's been talking about it too. I mean, the idea of an agentic future is being talked about by everyone. So what were some of the challenges that it took so long to get here?
I think in generative AI overall, there's a handful of challenges. Some of it are the technical challenges of just getting to where we can build these things. Even just over the last few years, getting to where we could have the scale of compute and things we needed at a cost that made it reasonable to build these models and train these models and do these things. That 5 or 10 years ago, that was a very different world than it is today. And so there's some of it is the technology and just getting to where we can envision and what we can see. And then some of it is more to do with the acceptance of it and trust. I actually believe that, AI in general, there's this corollary of oppositional force between human in the loop and trust in the AI. Right? The more you trust the AI, the less you're going to need some human in the loop. But we believe you probably always need human in the loop. But the more trust you can have in the AI, the less human in the loop you need. It's not that different really than a lot of technology we've already experienced in our daily lives. Like the amount that you trust cruise control in your car has to do with how much you've used it and how familiar you've gotten with it. And then eventually you start to trust adaptive cruise control. And then eventually maybe you trust it to do lane changes and so on and so forth. And so generative AI around software development is kind of the same thing. As we build out these agents, like you can build really small agents to do really specific tasks. And actually some of the agents that we're working on are sort of consolidations of agents. So we might have, for example, our agent for software development. I give it a task. I describe a job that I want Q to go do, much like I might say, hey, we're going to work on a project together. Let me tell you what I want you to go do. The first thing it does is it goes through a planning exercise. And you could think of that as an independent agent where it goes through a planning exercise and comes back and says, okay, well, based on what you told me and based on what code I see in this project, here's what I'm going to go do. I haven't done anything. I'm just going to tell you my plan. And then we can negotiate on that plan and agree to it. And then it's going to go do the work. And now you might think of that as another agent. So that's sort of part of this workflow, where it's actually going to go, write the code and do the work that you've asked it to go do and then come back and have that review. What's fascinating about how we think about this is that's a lot less human in the loop than, say, predictive code generation. While I'm typing in my IDE, I'm writing a method signature, and then I'm getting code suggestions. That's a high human in the loop activity. I'm looking at everything that the AI is doing and making a decision on if it's right or wrong. You could argue it's a lower trust activity because it's predictive. So there's some guesswork involved and it's not right all of the time. And so I have to look at it every time. But with agents, because we're able to give them kind of more capability through larger models and more training and different workflows, and we're providing them more context in what we're asking them to do, we're much more comfortable letting them work independently for a while. So less human in the loop. They can make a lot of code changes without us being involved in it. But then we're going to review it at the end. Not unlike we might review another developer on our team, but we're going to review that. So it's less human in the loop, higher trust, but there's still a oversight. There's still a gateway. And as we continue to progress, this idea that, we will create other AI agents that we embody more trust in, and we have lower human in the loop activities in. Some of those might be because they have a low risk of causing any harm. So maybe things that are more in the space of like observability, tell us when something goes wrong, but don't make any changes. And then as we get more and more trust, tell us when something goes wrong, tell us the changes you're going to make and we're going to approve it. And then eventually we'll get to, hey, just let us know what changes you made. We're good with it. And so there's a combination of where we are technologically and where we are sort of cognitively with our ability and willingness to trust AI to do these things. And so we have to kind of approach that very slowly. And I think it's, as we, you mentioned getting into some of the ethical things, I think that's kind of part of the ethical approach of like, let's take it at a pace that we're comfortable with and that people can feel comfortable with, and it can be successful. If I were to just come in and say, hey, I've got an AI that's going to like do everything for you, you're probably going to be pretty skeptical.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, the internship metaphor applies here. The more I trust a junior developer or an intern, the more work I let them do, the less I have to look at it, and that all comes with time and that all comes with trust. Yeah. I recently listened to an interview that Mark Zuckerberg did where he talked a lot about businesses and this idea that there may be a time where there's more agents than there are people in a business. And, how do you manage that? And I wonder what you think about that. Yeah.
It's an interesting concept. And I think it's one that can easily be taken in all kinds of different contexts. How many drivers of your car are there when your car is doing some of the driving, right? So you have to think about it that way. Like one of the things, like to go back to what you were saying about trust, like the more we trust, the more personal experience we have, the more we're going to trust. But also the more data validation we have, the more we're going to trust. And then it becomes a question, like to your point of like, how many agents do we have and things like that. I'll drop a data point on you here for a second, if you'll indulge me. I mentioned our agent for software development. And the reason I bring this up is I have a vision for where this is going to go in the future. And right now today, one of the ways we measure the capability of these agents is with a tool called SWE Bench, the SWE Bench. And it's for measuring these agents and doing their work to see how well they do at a number of different tasks. It's common data set, things like that. Right now, we're the leader on that measurement. The Q agent for software development is the leader on that. Okay. So we're quantifiably really good at this kind of stuff. But there's still a human element of like, oh, I've got to build trust to it. But as I do, then what happens is, to your question, I, as an individual developer, now have one or many agents at my disposal. And so now, as an individual developer, I'm actually a team of developers. Yeah. And so now, if you think about the capacity that I have to say, okay, well, actually, I'm going to become the orchestrator of my team of agents. I'm going to have work that I'm going to take on, and then I'm going to choose what work gets dispatched to agents and what work requires me and my cognitive abilities. Maybe I'm going to have the more mundane work done by the agents and the more challenging, cognitive, creative, problem-solving work done by me as a human, because I can apply a kind of different approach to it.
I have a question about the term agents. And, I think it's interesting. And I wonder if we should be personifying these things in that way. I mean, in essence, software, it's software. Mm-hmm. And it's automation. And there's all sorts of automation that's happening and has happened. We don't call them agents, but now all of a sudden these are all agents. So what do you think about that? And should we be personifying these scripts, let's call them, for the sake of this conversation?
I would say one of the hardest things in software development is naming things. So agents, I actually like the term agents in the sense that it really gives you a mental model for how they work and what they do. I actually think we do naturally personify AI quite a bit because it helps us understand what it's doing and how it's working. And maybe some of it comes from our lifetime of watching sci-fi movies and things like that. Uh-huh. But I think it helps build a mental model for how to interact. If I have this concept of an agent that I think of as being sort of independent, and I go, oh, I can actually assign work to this agent and it's going to go do its thing. Yeah. Whereas a script, I think of like, oh, I'm going to do this script and it's going to just kind of do some steps for me. And so I'm really comfortable with the name. I think it is a great way to embody how these things work. And the idea that I, as an individual developer in the not so distant future, will have that my sort of team of agents or tool belts of agents that I'm going to be able to use and deploy is really I think it's fascinating.
And now, before we dive deeper, I want to take a quick moment and tell you a little bit about one of our podcast partners. As a listener of this show, I know you're trying to stay on top of all things AI and tech, which is why you have to check out the amazing GeekWire podcast. Produced by GeekWire and hosted by Todd Bishop. It's a treasure of insights featuring industry leaders and the latest tech trends that are shaping our world, and the perfect companion podcast to Shift AI. GeekWire Podcast is where technology meets curiosity and covers the world of technology, startups, and geek culture. Expand your tech horizons and join the conversation. Tune into the GeekWire Podcast today, a perfect complement to our own discussions here. Don't miss out. Follow the GeekWire Podcast on Apple Podcast, Spotify, or your favorite listening app. Now back to the episode. Let's talk about the future, though. Maybe we can use developers as a starting point, but just all of us, society. Mm-hmm. I believe that these agents are going to get better and better and better. We're going to have a lot more of them, and they are going to do a lot of the work for us. Are you concerned about what's going to happen in a society where a lot of the work is going to get done by computers and by agents? And what are the human things left to do? Like, what makes us really great? And I hear a lot of people like the stock answer is, well, the mundane work's going to get done by the computers and the humans are going to do all this creative stuff. Is that really true? I mean, is it really going to be a point where we get to do that creative stuff, or are we there would be a lot of people out of work?
I think that's a narrative that gets spun up, I think, where like the challenge with the AI space is it's a really easy area to invoke fear, uncertainty, and doubt. Yeah. Right. And we've seen enough movies of AI taking over the world and doing all these things. And so it's really easy to invoke that. I don't believe that at all. And you can look historically for centuries at innovations that occurred that radically changed the environment and how people did things and how people accomplished things. And yet here we are, we're all still working. There's more jobs to be done today than there were years ago, right?
Yep.
I jokingly say, the invention of Excel did not mean that we don't need accountants anymore, right? It just meant that they had a new tool and they can do more stuff, and we have more accountants now than we had before. And so I view this very much the same way. This is just tools, and this is how tools get, sort of tools innovate and evolve and get made differently over time. And then we find ways to use them that help us be more productive so that we can continue to apply our cognitive abilities into innovation and novel experimentation and creation of new things. Like being able to tell, some development, I'll give you a good example. Every engineering team that I've ever encountered spends somewhere between 20 to 40% of all of their engineering resources on call and live site incident response. That's a lot
20
of
to 40%.
On average.
Yeah. Wow.
You'll find the occasional people who are like, oh no, we don't spend that much. But on average, across a large spectrum of teams I've seen, that's pretty typical.
Wow.
And by the way, when I say this to people, like most people are like, yep, that's about right. So imagine if you could apply AI in a way that you could reduce that to 10%, right? That doesn't mean you get rid of the other, 10 to 30% of your engineers. It means now you can create new products with them. You can create innovation.
Go faster.
The objective of every business is to conceive some business value. Like I come up with a great idea that's going to create new business value for me. And I want that idea implemented instantly and for free. Yeah. But I can't. Physics don't allow it to be instantly and for free. And so we have to take the time and energy and effort to build the software to create the value. And so all we've been doing in developer tools and frameworks and all the things we've been building for decades is to compress that time to as short as possible. And generative AI, I think, is probably one of the most compelling technologies we've seen in a couple of decades that will do that. We'll compress that time so that we can go from business value to customers feeling business value as close to instantly and free as possible.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Well, I also want to touch on the responsibility side too. I know that you guys have been talking a lot about that. Mm-hmm. And it's something that people are really scared of. Businesses are scared about, individuals are scared about. So how do you think about the responsible use of this technology, and how should we be thinking about that as we implement and integrate AI into our businesses?
We have taken a very early approach in responsible AI. Like this is one of the sort of core founding tenets as we started to get in this space, is that if we are going to have an AI, if we're going to be responsible for creating an AI that is participatory in the software development process, then it's critical that we do that. Both we do that in a responsible way, and we enable you as the user of that AI to use it in a responsible way. And so this has been like DNA for us from the beginning and continues to be. And so we've done a number of things in terms of everything from how we train models, in terms of how we do things like sanitize code or even track code that we're using to train models. So for example, one of the features we built into Q really early on, way back before it was even called Q, was this concept of a reference tracker. Meaning that if you're writing code and you get a code suggestion that Q is giving you, and that code suggestion has a high similarity to open source code that is under some kind of license, like an MIT or Apache license, then we're going to identify that. And we're going to say, hey, this code has a high degree of similarity. We're going to show you where to go look. You can use that if you like. Use it the way it's supposed to be used. But if we were coding together and I copied some code from an open source repo, it would be my responsibility to say, hey, this is where I got it from. And we have to follow these attribution guidelines if we're going to use this code. So that was one example, but also things like our service cards for AI, where we talk about how AI is built and how it's used and what we do, like really being transparent about these things, and then bringing more tools to the developer. So for example, we integrated at a very early stage static analysis testing for vulnerabilities and for common errors in code, so that, again, if we are collaborating with a human on writing code, we can do a lot of work to make sure the code that we generate is really good quality code, but we have no control over what happens in that collaboration, and we have no control over what was already there in that code. And so bringing the tools to the developer, say at any point in time, you can check this code and see if there's a vulnerability that we can detect, or see if there's a pattern that maybe you shouldn't be using. And we're going to provide you the guidance. And in many cases, we're going to provide you a one-click fix, because we can generate the code to fix that error. I mean, you can just click a link and it'll be replaced.
Yeah, that's interesting. Well, I'm going to shift gears a little bit. I always ask this question on the show because the show is about the future of work, and work is changing so much for people, and it's changing a lot for young people that historically have had mentors. And now that they're working from home, that's getting more difficult. I always like to know about your mentors, kind of coming up as a developer. Who were the people that impacted you? And this is a two-part question, because since we are talking about Q and agents, can you imagine a future where a Q or an agent can become your mentor?
That's a really good question. Always the first one first, which is yes, I've had the good fortune of having a number of really good mentors in my life. And I've had the good fortune at the companies I've worked at to be able to reach out to a lot of people. I've kind of never let an org chart get in the way of me emailing somebody and saying, hey, I'd like to ask you a question. So I've had the good fortune to have some great mentors. Early on, I had some software engineering mentors, and I remember one of them told me as I was learning how to write software in a professional way, he's like, just write code every day. Even if it's just one line, just write code every day. And just like that stuck with me. It's like, that's part of the process. The repetition is what makes you grow and get better. I've had great business mentors along the way as I've learned how to productize software, and people who really help me understand, the business of software and how it comes together, and even doing things like building products and trying to decide on business models around them, and recognizing that what we're trying to do is make our customers successful. Our revenue is ancillary to that, because if our customers are successful, the revenue will follow that. And kind of having some of those tenets in mind has been really great. And I've had the good fortune of having very senior executive mentors, because I'm not afraid to ask. And so I've had, people on boards of Fortune 100 companies as my mentors along the way, which is great. And so that's been fantastic. Now, to the second part of your question, can I imagine having AI as a mentor? Yes, I can. I don't know that it works the same way, but it does fill part of the mentorship need, because there's some portion of the mentorship need is like just asking for skills development, like asking your mentors to help you learn and give you some guidance and give you some direction where you go. And I think AI is actually quite capable of doing that with the right information for the models and the right context around it and the right training for what it's going to do. I think it'd be really fantastic at that. The soft skills around it, maybe less so. I mean, I think we can train AI to help with soft skills and things like that, but there's maybe I'm a little old school, but there is also still a place to like just sit down with a cup of coffee and have a chat with somebody, and what you get just sort of ambiently from that interaction and from that, and frankly, from the network that they expose you to. That big part of mentorships is they help you connect with the network that, again, we can manufacture a lot of these things with AI, but they're not going to be quite the same. And so I think that's where, going back to like, what's the future of AI and what does that look like? Recognizing that AI is a tool, not a person, as much as we personify them. They're tools. They're things we use to do our jobs and do our jobs faster and better. And we can apply them in lots of different ways. They're never, in my mind, or in my opinion, going to replace what humans are able to bring into the equation. Our processing unit is really amazing, and our memory storage is really incredible. And it's going to take a long time for us to really replace that.
Yeah. Well, let's look into the future a little bit. I know that you sit in rooms with really smart people at Amazon, and I know you can't share everything, but I want you to look into the future, 10 years, 20 years out. What excites you, within the work that you're doing right now, but also just, broadly within this technology, and what can you see in your crystal ball?
Well, I think what excites me is some of the things we've already been talking about. Like if you go 5-10 years out into the future, it's always a challenging question, especially in technology, to think 5-10 years out. Like, what were we doing 10 years ago? And did we envision this? Probably not.
Yeah.
But to think out and recognize like, we will have, in 10 years, we will have advanced AI to, so significantly, and it will be so accessible and so affordable that it will literally be part of almost everything we do in some capacity. And from a software development standpoint, like I was mentioning, like the idea that me as an individual developer gets to kind of be a team of developers, like the idea that I could sit down to take on a task, and instead of working on a relatively small area of the product that I'm responsible for, because that's the capacity I have, my capacity, has doubled, tripled, quadrupled, magnitude of order larger, because I have all these agents at my disposal. And now I'm orchestrating AI to do the work, and I'm reviewing the work that it does, and I'm kind of in a different position doing a different body of work. But I'm still responsible, and I'm still thinking about the problem and I'm still trying to solve the problem. And so I think it's really like probably the thing I'm most fascinated about is exactly that. Like I have kids at the age where in 10 years they'll be into the workforce, and I'm thinking about what their lives are going to be like when they're into the workforce. And the idea that they're going to be using AI in all kinds of meaningful and different ways. My daughter wants to be a trauma surgeon. Like, how will AI be relevant or prevalent in her life as a trauma surgeon? And how will it help her, correlate all the medical information that might be necessary to help her do the most immediate job at hand in dealing with them? That's fascinating. Like, just to think about what these things are and how they'll work.
Yeah, it is fascinating. Well, I end the show by asking the same question. I'm going to ask it to you as well. If you can describe the future of work, how would you describe it in 2 words? And then you can elaborate, but what would those 2 words be to describe the future of work?
Very promising. That's what I would describe it as. I think that we are so just scratching the surface of what we can do with AI. And we've had a really seismic shift in how we can use machine learning and AI and generative AI to the point where what is going to happen in the next 10 years is going to be so incredible. And it's going to change how we think and how we work and how we approach problems that, to me, it is very promising.
Yeah, I love it. Well, Doug, I really appreciate you being on the show. It's so powerful to have some big cloud providers in our state, in our area, and to be able to talk, directly to folks that are experiencing this stuff on the front lines. And so I really appreciate you coming on and talking to us, and I hope to have you back again.
Thank you so much. Anytime. I love these conversations.
That's a wrap. Thanks for tuning in. It was a pleasure to have Doug Seven on today's episode. Doug brings a unique perspective on how AI is revolutionizing developer experiences and the broader implications for the future of work. If you want to stay connected with Doug, you can find him on LinkedIn and X. Definitely follow him to keep up with his thoughts on AI and the evolving developer ecosystem. I continue to be amazed by the insights our guests bring to the show, and I'm excited about the future episodes we have lined up. I truly appreciate you spending your time with us today. Thank you for listening to this episode, and don't forget to subscribe to the Shift AI podcast for more exciting interviews, and be sure to check out the Augmented AI Weekly newsletter for updates on how AI can help you scale your business. The Shift AI podcast is syndicated by GeekWire, and we're grateful to have the show sponsored by Augmented AI. Our theme music was created by Dave Angel.